the Iranian mission at the UN said last week that they do have direct line of communication and are talking to the Americans. Are they wrong?
I'm just not gonna. I will let them offer any clarification to what they're saying. So I'm happy for people to tune in, but when you are asking the same questions as your colleagues ask, you're kind of wasting their time.
Okay,
so I'm gonna stop.
Can
there.
I just
Thanks,
offer one more about the?
Thank you, everybody. I have a heart out today. I don't have anything off the top today. So Sean, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, nothing. Well, can we start maybe broadly about where things stand in the Middle East, particularly with the ceasefire talks? That the idea of having talks on the 15th. Where does that stand? Are you confident that talks can take place? What is the U.S. trying to do to get to that goal?
So look, this is something that we are working around the clock every day. You saw the statement that was put out trilaterally at the tail end of last week from President Biden, President Sisi, and the Emir of Qatar. So this is something that we think, for all the reasons I've talked about before, is just so vitally important to the region. First and foremost, it is time for the remaining hostages to be returned home, and that includes, of course, American citizens. It's also has the potential to bring about much needed relief to the people of Gaza, and so that's what's at the table, and that's what's at stake, and that's what we'll continue to work towards. But as it relates to the negotiations, Sean, and status and where things stand, I'm just not going to get into the specifics of the process, just given sensitivities and wanting to see this process play out.
Well, not to get too much into the specifics, yeah. But for example, there is I'm sure you saw the New York Times report today about the Israeli negotiating position, saying that some demands made in recent weeks, for example, the Philadelphia corridor, the border with Egypt, that Israel has demanded to have control of that. Do you think that both sides actually want a truce and are ready to make some compromises to get there?
So look, Sean, again, I'm just not going to get into the specifics of the negotiation process. That certainly would not be helpful from up here, and it would not helpful to a sensitive process. On whatever the reporting that is out there, Sean, I've seen those reports, and I'm certainly not going to get into alleged documents or comment on private diplomatic conversations. I'll also say that, the media says a lot of things, government officials say a lot of things. What I can say from the U.S. perspective is that we are so clearly committed to this because we think it is in the vital interest of the region. As you've heard me say, we think that a ceasefire deal has the potential to create conditions so that hostages can release, so we can see an increase in humanitarian aid, and more broadly create conditions for diplomacy to get the region out of this endless cycle of violence. And I will also just so note what I said yesterday, that Prime Minister Netanyahu confirmed that his team will be at the ceasefire talks on Thursday, and that they'll be prepared to finalize the details for implementing the deal. But I'm not going to get more specific beyond that.
Do you know where the talks would take place?
I don't have any updates on that.
Just one more for you before I pass on.
Yeah.
The other the Iranian aspect of the equation, if you will. Obviously, there have been talks. I know the secretary spoke yesterday with the Turkish foreign minister, with the Iraqi prime minister, about this and other issues. What's the assessment now? Do you think that is there still a fear of Iranian retaliation and expectation of that? Where do things stand now in dissuading them potentially?
Thanks, Ron. So I don't want to speculate on what actions the Iranian regime might take, but I will say, as the secretary has said repeatedly, no one benefits from any kind of retaliation. And what we've been engaged on is intensive diplomacy with allies and partners who are helping us communicate that message to the region, including directly to Iran. And a number of ways in which we're doing that is through, of course, some of the counterpart calls that you have seen the secretary participate in over not just yesterday, but over the past 2 weeks now. We're also communicating this message directly to Israel, and also reiterating that our commitment to Israel's security is ironclad, and we'll continue to defend Israel against attacks from Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups, just as we'll continue to defend American personnel. But everyone in the region should understand that further attacks only perpetuate conflict, instability, and insecurity for everyone. And so what we're focused on is intensively on de-escalation through diplomacy. Go ahead. Welcome.
Thank you
Since
very
your
much.
First day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So is there any communication between the US and Iran at the moment?
So I'm just not going to speak to private diplomatic conversations. What I can say is that we have been engaging with partners who are communicating that message directly to Iran. I'm not aware of any communication between the U.S.
And do you expect them to hold off from any retaliation until after Thursday's talk?
So, as I just said to Sean, I certainly don't want to speculate on any timeline. What I will say is that we have been stressing to allies, partners, like-mindeds, just how important it is that the parties not take steps that are going to perpetuate this conflict, that are going to lead to further instability and insecurity. No one benefits from any kind of retaliation, and so we want to not see any escalation or any attack take place in the first place.
And you expect Hamas to be there?
So we've seen the reports of what they have said as it relates to their participation. Our partners in Qatar have assured us that they will work to have Hamas represented. As I just said to Sean, it is far time for Hamas to release the remaining hostages, including the American citizens. But broadly, we fully expect these talks to move forward as they should.
So regardless of whether they're there or not, the talks happen?
So, as I said, Qatar has assured us that they will work to have Hamas represented there, and we fully expect these talks to move forward.
Thank you.
All right, Shannon.
So
I'll come to you.
Qatar has assured that they will work to have Hamas there, but it's still not guaranteed that Hamas will participate. A lot of members of the group have been saying that's because of reluctance that they perceive from Israel to commit to a deal, to implement a deal. Do you think that's the message the world should get from Hamas's lack of participation if things go forward as they stand, or is Hamas unwilling to commit to a deal?
So I'm not going to get into the mind of Mr. Sinwar. Let me just say a couple things. First, this whole process started when President Biden in late May laid out a very clear proposal of the contours of a ceasefire deal that was very quickly endorsed by the G7, quickly endorsed by the UN Security Council, quickly endorsed by the Arab world, endorsed by Israel, and so on and so forth. We continue to believe that a ceasefire proposal in lines with that is achievable, and that's exactly why you saw President Biden, President Sisi, and the Qatari Emir put out that trilateral statement last week. It is imperative that these talks continue, that we get this process across the finish line because of what we believe it can achieve when it comes to the hostages being released, when it comes to humanitarian aid, and when it comes to greater diplomacy for the region. And I will just note again that in light of that trilateral statement, Prime Minister Netanyahu quickly confirmed that his team will be at the ceasefire talks on Thursday, and that they'll be prepared to finalize the deals for implementing this. And simultaneously, our Qatari partners have assured us that they are working to ensure that there is Hamas representation as well. So we'll let this process play out, but we fully expect these talks to move forward as they should.
And on the anticipated Iranian attack on Israel, do you still see a broad level of support among the coalition of particularly Middle Eastern countries that helped defend Israel in April, or do you think that has waned at this point?
So I'm certainly not going to speak to other countries' efforts and how they might be adjusting or not adjusting any security posture they're taking. What I can say is that no one is naive about Iran's malign, destabilizing behavior, particularly through its proxies, particularly in the Middle East region. And what I can say on behalf of the United States is that we certainly won't hesitate to defend Israel as well as our personnel from not just attacks from Iran, but Iranian-backed proxies as well. Camilla.
Thanks. A couple of questions about other figureheads that could create potential obstacles. Wall Street Journal reported that Sinwar had said through Arab mediators that if Israel's serious about negotiations and wants Hamas to participate in this week's talks, then they need to stop all military operations in Gaza. As you know, Hamas have made Sinwar their head of their political bureau, whatever that means. Are you guys taking what he says seriously? Do you see what he says as just bluster, or is it potential to? Does he have any kind of potential to stop Hamas's participation? How should we read this?
So you saw the secretary speak to this last week in Annapolis with the appointment of Mr. Sinwar as Hamas's political bureau chief. From our point of view, that designation didn't change anything. Over the course of this whole process, over the course of this whole conflict, it has been clear to everyone that Mr. Sinwar continues to be the decision maker. And when it comes to the future of the Palestinian people, when it comes to the ability to alleviate some of the suffering and to alleviate some of the dire situations that we're seeing in the Gaza Strip, ultimately that is also up to Mr. Sinwar. In response to the trilateral statement that was put out last week, the Israelis have confirmed that they will have a team present ready to continue and carry forward these talks. It is imperative that Hamas do the same, because it is far time for these hostages to be released and to bring relief to the people of Gaza. And we fully expect these talks to move forward. As I said just a moment ago, our Qatari partners are also working to ensure that there is Hamas representation, and I will let the process play out.
Okay, thank you. And then on Israel, you guys have a lot at stake all the time in the region, particularly this week. With these talks that you guys are, really helping push into place, but you also have figures like the National Security Minister in Israel, Ben-Gvir, going up on the most explosive piece of real estate in the region, again, the Temple Mount, to what can only be perceived as something that he thinks is his right to impose his policy on something, but that is not the status quo policy that Netanyahu has come out and said, this is not our government policy. Netanyahu can only say so much, so can you guys. This is all rhetoric when you condemn actions like that, but these actions have real potential to escalate things in the region. What is your response to what he's doing, that he's doing this again? And also, is there something the US can do? Can you sanction a figure like Ben-Gvir? You are able to sanction other figures in the region. It doesn't matter that he's an Israeli government official. Is there anything that you guys can do to stop this continuing to happen?
So, on the second part of your question, Camilla, certainly I'm just not going to preview or get into what's possible or not possible, but I would say that we certainly are paying close attention to actions and activities that we find to be a detraction from Israel's security, a contributor to greater insecurity and instability in the region, and that would certainly be the actions that we saw today that Mr. Ben-Gvir participated in. Even the Prime Minister's office itself made clear that the events of this morning are a deviation from what is Israeli policy and a deviation from the status quo. And let me just say clearly that the United States stands firmly for preservation of the historic status quo with respects to the holy sites of Jerusalem. And any unilateral action, which this would be any unilateral action like this that jeopardizes such a status quo is unacceptable. And not only is it unacceptable, it detracts from what we think is a vital time as we are working to get this ceasefire deal across the finish line. It detracts from what our stated goal is for the region, which is a two-state solution, a Palestinian state and an Israeli state that's side by side, living in with dignity and harmony. We recognize how important the holy site is, so we urge all sides to respect the status quo, but certainly actions like this they detract from that, and not only do they detract from that, we find them to be unacceptable. Said, go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. First, on the Secretary's trip, what does he hope to achieve this time around that he was not able to achieve in the past 8 trips?
Well, Said, I don't have any travel for Secretary Blinken to preview at the moment. What I can say is that as it relates to the Middle East region, the Secretary is laserly focused and engaged on the region through calls with his counterparts, through calls with other leaders. He has been working the phones for the past number of weeks, continuing to echo the same message, which is we are close to getting this ceasefire deal across the finish line. It is vital vital for the release of the remaining hostages, including American citizens. It is vital for a surge in humanitarian assistance, which we believe will help alleviate the suffering that we're seeing in Gaza. And it is vital to help get this region out of this endless cycle of violence. He made that clear to a number of counterparts that he's spoken to in the past few days, and I expect those kinds of conversations and diplomacy to continue, Saeed, but I don't want to preview or get ahead of any potential travel.
I know you talked about the attack on the Tabain school yesterday, but the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, condemned in no uncertain terms what happened, the attack, the massacre of Tabain school. Will the United States do the same thing? Do you agree that such an act is thoroughly condemnable?
Saeed, we of course mourn the loss of any civilian life, and over the course of this conflict, too many civilians have been killed. But also, as I said yesterday, the reason that we are even having this conversation is because Hamas continues to have a track record of not just using civilians as human shields, but co-locating itself among civilian infrastructure, co-locating itself among what normally would be facilities that have protected status, but when they become fronts for potential militant operations, certainly they have the possibility to lose their status. That does not minimize or diminish the moral and strategic imperative that our partners in Israel have to take every possible step to ensure that civilian casualties are minimized. Both of those things can be true.
So do you have any evidence that actually militants were there at the Tabain school?
As we said yesterday, Saeed, we have been in close touch with the IDF on this and continue to discuss with them. But I will also let them speak to their own military operations.
I understand, but what you're saying that they have a track record, but that is dependent on what the Israeli army says, correct?
This is their operation. I will let them speak to it.
Now, a couple more questions on the New York Times is reporting that Israel is less flexible now on the negotiations. Seems that, and in fact, by statements by the Prime Minister himself and statements by the Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, saying that the Israeli Prime Minister has really backtracked from the position on the proposal that you mentioned on May 31 by the President. So do you think that the Israelis have backed down, or at least the Prime Minister has backed down from what he's agreed to earlier?
I'm just not going to categorize it, Saeed, and answering Sean's question or our new colleague's question. I said that I'm not going to get into the specifics of this ongoing negotiating process. I can tell you that the reason that the United States continues to lead on this and engage on this is because we believe it is vitally important to the region. And again, I will just note that when it comes to our partners in Israel, they've indicated that they will have a team present to continue to finalize on implementing this deal. But beyond that, I'm just not going to get into specifics. You are welcome to ask, because of course it's your time, but I'm not going to address them.
Okay, that's fair. Now, the Hamas is saying that they have agreed to the proposal as it was proposed, and there is nothing else to negotiate. Is there anything else to negotiate? Are there details that still need to be negotiated?
So me answering that question would be me speaking about the negotiating process from a podium like this, which I think is wholly unhelpful to the process. So I'm just not going to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alex, go ahead.
Thank you. Very quickly on the region, and then we'll move to Ukraine.
Sure.
Mahmoud Abbas popped up in the Kremlin today. How closely are you following this trip, and what's your best guess about what's going on between the two, and how involved or not involved has Russia been in the latest situation in the Middle East?
So, from my vantage point, I don't think Russia has really played a role, not in working to get the parties to get to this ceasefire stage, but also beyond that, working to be a source of humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people. As it relates to President Abbas's travel, I don't have anything to offer there. I would let the PA speak to his own engagements. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant.
Yeah.
I know you've been asked about the Iranian aspect in the negotiations. Today, there were reports that the Iranian may send a delegation to the negotiations. They disputed that, but were they offered to be on the table of the negotiations?
So I'm just not going to speak to the specifics of the negotiation process. It would, so I will just leave it at that. I don't want to get into the details.
And on Hezbollah and Israel, should a retaliation happen now, I know you are trying very hard to avoid an escalation, but if there's a response from Hezbollah, do you have a sense that Hezbollah or Israel understand the red lines, at least to not go on a wide-scale war?
We are taking every possible effort to ensure that all relevant actors understand that any kind of activity that we think is going to cause further instability, insecurity, cause further escalation is wholly unhelpful, certainly at a time like this. I will also just note, though, that we, of course, stand ready to defend our partners in Israel and defend them from attacks from either Iran or Iranian proxies, but we are working around the clock. Secretary Blinken is, through engagement, through diplomacy, to try and de-escalate and try to ensure that something doesn't happen. But this is a process that we're working around the clock. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant.
Yeah.
Going back to Secretary Blinken's phone call with the Iraqi Prime Minister. So was this call just to talk about concerns over the Iranian-backed groups in Iraq to attack the U.S. forces, or does the Secretary Blinken send any message to Iran through the Iraqi Prime Minister, as they are enjoying a very good relations with Tehran?
So the message was pretty clear in the readout. I don't have to get more. I don't have more specifics to offer than that. They spoke about a number of issues, including issues affecting the region, and a commitment that they both shared to doing whatever possible to send clear messages about de-escalation and not wanting to see any kind of conflict or violence spread or grow out of hand.
And then last time when Secretary Blinken spoke with the Iraqi Prime Minister, they were discussing the protection of the U.S. forces in Iraq. But in less than 24 hours, the Iraqi militia groups attacked the U.S. forces in Iraq and injured 7 U.S. personnel in Al-Assad base. So do you trust the Iraqi government that they have the power to rein the militia groups to not attack the U.S. forces? Has the Secretary Blinken and the State Department shared this concern with the Iraqi government?
So, look, first, let me just say broadly that, of course, we continue to believe that that the Iraqi government is a important partner in the region. But as we have said a number of times before, that they also have a role to play in helping hold, I should say, some of these malign proxy groups accountable. I will also just note that when it comes to the United States, we certainly won't hesitate to take appropriate action to hold those to account who may put our personnel in harm's way. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question on South Asia. Before that, I have one on the deadliest Israeli airstrike on Gaza. You talk about this in detail and express your concerns. But at the same time, it looks like you're also supporting the slaughter of innocents in the name of self-defense. New polls show that majority of Americans, especially the young Americans, disapprove Israeli actions in Gaza. How do you explain this to Americans? Because their taxpayers' money, U.S. government is providing bombs, small arms, and other forms of aid to Israel.
So,
and secondly, sir, how would you define the current policy of this administration, which is like keep expressing concerns and keep providing bombs?
So first, I think I would just reject the overall premise of that question. I could not disagree with it more. Let me just be very clear. Any number above 0 of civilian lives lost is wholly unacceptable to us. It is deeply, deeply troubling and unfortunate that we find ourselves in a scenario where we have a belligerent like Hamas that continues to use civilians as human shields, that continues to utilize civilian infrastructure and what should be protected facilities as safe haven. But that does not minimize the strategic and moral imperative that Israel has to minimize those civilian casualties. And this is something that we take incredibly seriously. And when it comes to the use of our security articles, the State Department pays close attention and is reviewing very closely potential reports of alleged international human rights law and gross human rights violations through the various existing policies that we have at our disposal, which I've spent a lot of time up here talking about them, as Matt has. Examples include the Lehi-Veti Forum, for example, guidance that is detailed under the U.S. conventional arms transfer policy, reviewing credible reports of civilian harm potentially caused by U.S. origin end items through the CHURG process, and other designations and actions that we have at our disposal. And we'll continue that line of effort. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant.
Yeah.
Yesterday, the department commemorated the 75th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions. It said, quote, the anniversary is a fitting occasion to reaffirm our commitment to respecting international humanitarian law. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court for violations of the Geneva Conventions are often addressed, seeks arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu as well as Hamas leadership. Netanyahu was just welcomed by Washington. Just in recent days, the department said it wouldn't sanction a unit accused of war crimes, including binding, gagging, and killing a 78-year-old Palestinian American. Israeli forces, as has been discussed, killed over 90 people as they prayed at a school and mosque. The Israeli forces shot an American citizen as he protested illegal settlements in the West Bank. Nevertheless, the U.S. released $3.5 billion to Israel to buy more U.S. weapons. So how does the Biden-Harris administration expect Americans and the rest of the world to take such commitments towards the Geneva Convention seriously, given just the past few days?
So we have been consistently clear that Israel has every moral and strategic imperative to minimize the impacts of on civilians. And when we have seen actions or incidents that we deem to be inconsistent with that, not only do we raise our concerns with the partner country as appropriate, but we factor it into the however which way we may implement certain policy responses as a deterrence for these kinds of incidents to reoccur in the future. I talked about some of these tools at our disposal recently, the Lehi-Vetting Forum, the guidance that's laid out in the conventional arms transfer policy, the CHURG process, as well as other things like visa restrictions and designations that we have. We urge Israel to thoroughly and transparently investigate reports of gross violations of human rights and take all appropriate action, and we'll continue to do that.
So I know that the department and the U.S. issued certain statements mourning the loss of life from some of these killings, and you talk about deterrence. Just hours ago, 2 twins who were newborn were killed in Gaza with their mother and grandmother as their father went to collect their birth certificates. They're 4 days old, born into war, experienced only war, killed by war. How is the U.S. responding to this instance, given, again, this comes a day after the U.S. celebrated
So I'm not going to speak to specific instances and incidents that happen. I will let the IDF speak to any operations they can take. I will say, just hearing this from your reporting, this is obviously incredibly heartbreaking. Again, Israel has every moral and strategic imperative to minimize civilian loss, but I don't have any of the other contours surrounding this operation, and I will let the IDF speak to that.
Finally, just on a case that you do have contours for. It's now 197 days since Hindu Job was killed, her family members were killed, the medics at Sabre were killed. What's the update on that?
I don't have any updates for you. I have to wrap soon, so I want to get to a couple more people. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. A few questions, if I can. First of all, the Iranian mission at the UN said last week that they do have direct line of communication and are talking to the Americans. Are they wrong?
I'm just not going to, I will let them offer any clarification to what they're saying.
So there is a clarification. They should offer a clarification.
I just don't have any comment to offer. What I can say is that we don't have any direct communication with the Iranian regime. The messages that we are sending is through other countries and allies partners, and we are continuing to stress the importance of de-escalation and not partaking in any activity that would be construed as destabilizing or causing greater insecurity.
Thank you. And following on from that, it appears that certainly the reporting is suggesting that the Iranians are now suggesting that any retaliation will be dependent on the success or otherwise of the talks this week, the ceasefire talks. How does that change the framing of Thursday from your perspective?
It doesn't, and I think I've answered this question a couple of times already. So I'm happy for people to tune in, but when you are asking the same questions as your colleagues ask, you're kind of wasting their time.
Okay,
so I'm going to stop.
Can I just ask one more about the?
Thank you, everybody. I have a hard out today.